This week on Act Out, the next recession and/or crash is nigh, and one of the architects of the last crash wants you to pencil in 2020. We dive into some new old news on how we got here and what we need to make it through. Next, the trial of the century was going to start on Monday, October 29th, but hey, we like black gold. And finally, Native activist Alison Renville joins us to talk about the authoritarian move to disenfranchise indigenous voters in North Dakota. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. A noise flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. If you are both a viewer of this show and a listener to my podcast with Lee Camp, Common Censored, you will recall that we very recently covered the news that, of all entities, JP Morgan Chase has announced the date for the next financial crisis, 2020. So, much like the idea of a serial killer announcing that the next round of murders will take place in roughly a year and a half, one can't help but wonder, why? Not so much why they're a killer, because that would require a much deeper social and psychological analysis that really delves into the depths of mental health in our mentally and emotionally oppressive and repressive society. And we don't really have time for that right now, so not so much why they're a killer, but why we let them be. Why do we let giants like JP Morgan Chase, a behemoth bank that made bank on the 2008 recession, announce that they're going to do it again, so everyone get ready? That is really twisted. Of course, capitalism's fan base will say, oh, but that's just how it is. I mean, we have booms and we have busts. Okay, but first of all, why? No, really, why do you build a society on such a flimsy system that demands a 10-year cycle of deep economic pain that only further oppresses and marginalizes the most vulnerable? And secondly, you don't actually have booms and busts. What you have is busts, flatlines, and then more busts. Since the 2008 bank bailouts, any semblance of a boom has gone straight to the fuckwits who pushed us into this mess in the first place, giant financial institutions and the richest of the rich. It therefore followed that income inequality grew and continues to grow, thanks to a wide array of other factors, from wage stagnation to tax cuts for the wealthiest to further Wall Street regulation cuts to doomed-to-fail austerity measures. Indeed, income inequality has returned to levels last seen in the 1820s. As the saying goes, public policy, private pain. And while we can trace today's suffering back to 2008, it actually goes back further. Financialization is a term given to the expansion of financial markets and motives that hold an unprecedented influence on our daily lives, from nature to the household to global economies. Everything's for sale. Everything has a price. So let's sell. In other words, financialization means deregulating institutions like JP Morgan Chase, whose sole purpose is profit. People and planet be damned. Back in the day, our hugely unnecessary and overstretched spending on such fiascos as the Cold War and Vietnam far surpassed the amount of gold that we had that was at the time an anchor for our currency. Known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, this gold standard served as a make good on our investments and our spending. But in 1971, we decided to cut loose and adopt a fiat currency, which we still have today. And since 1971, our previously fettered capitalism has been raging, unchained and unhinged. Neoliberal free market fancies were the chic new trend, complete with floating exchange rates, free, i.e. corporatized trade, deregulation, speculation, and the free movement of capital. To put it another way, we play with a lot more money than we actually have and can pay for, as shown in this graphic. The gray represents global GDP, and the green represents global financial assets, or the money played with via transactions. As time went on from that 1971 gilded breakup, the value of global financial transactions rapidly surpassed that of real production business and commerce. The rise in computing technology meant that trillions of dollars could be moved around without ever actually moving a physical dollar, just ones and zeros on a screen. Banks no longer work in the paradigm of personal loans and savings. They're gambling centers that repackage, sell, and trade in loans. Furthermore, the shadow banking system, or SBS, so-called due to its role as an unofficial, thereby totally unregulated banking institutions, has grown significantly since 2008 and accounts for $160 trillion in assets worldwide, almost half of the $340 trillion of total financial assets globally. Already in 2014, the consulting firm McKinsey's estimated the world debt stood at $199 trillion, 287% of global GDP. And that impossible debt rests on our shoulders because financialization isn't just about runaway spending, but runaway accumulation. An accumulation that never trickles down, but always robs from below. Research has shown that financialization has increased inequality, slowed down investment in real production, mounted pressures on indebted households and individuals, and led to a decline in democratic accountability. A capitalist system that, by definition, puts capital above all else, has wrought our bust and bust system, driven by unanchored markets that are accountable to no one but their stockholders, who use us as a buffer. A new billionaire is created every second day. Every second day. And here we are looking to JP Morgan Chase to light our way through the next crash. I don't have a crystal ball, but I feel pretty confident in saying that there's no light at the end of that tunnel. But hey, I'm not all about the doom and gloom. There is, of course, a way to brighten our future, to make the inevitable collapse of capitalism a just transition towards people and planet over profit. And it has a lot to do with understanding our enemy and approaching them realistically. How are we to address a global, borderless, financialized system unless we, too, consider ourselves borderless? Unless we see ourselves mirrored in those fighting and building thousands of miles away? In the same breath, how are we to start? We can't possibly start on a global scale. That doesn't make sense. We have to start locally. We have to start where we're at, with who's around us, with what we've got. Consider the growing global network of municipalist organizing that we talked about back in episode 159. Building on local levels while also connecting struggles and sharing tactics on a global scale. This combination of local focus with broad reach is vital. Such efforts will demand solidarity rather than charity, the shifting of power, the shifting of control over resources, and some honestly uncomfortable paradigm and life shifts that threaten the comfortable lives of some at the expense of many. Oftentimes, our thinking is stuck in an anchored gold standard world where there were limits to greed and borders mattered more. But that just isn't the case anymore. And we have to think, live, and act in our place in time, directly targeting and fighting the institutions that oppress and subjugate us. At a risk of sounding overly dramatic, this is honestly our only hope. And speaking of our only hope for the future, as the saying goes, the children are our future. And this coming Monday, October 29th, the so-called trial of the century was slated to begin in Eugene, Oregon. Slated to? Yeah. First off, what is this huge trial? Well, back in 2015, Kelsey Cascadia Rose Juliana submitted a constitutional climate change lawsuit, along with 20 other youth against the United States government, claiming that through the government's affirmative actions that cause climate change, it has violated the youngest generation's constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property, as well as failed to protect essential public trust resources. Now, since the very beginning, the powers that be fought hard to silence and essentially kill this case. Indeed, the whole legal process has been nothing if not indicative of the points that these youth are raising. The collusion and corruption is as evident in the pushback against this case as it is in the creation and enforcement of policy. The fossil fuel industry attempted on multiple occasions to get judges and courts to dismiss the case, even intervening as co-defendants with the U.S. government. The Trump administration has pushed hard to avoid trial, moving for a protective order and a stay of discovery. And last Friday, a mere 10 days before the trial was set to begin, the U.S. Supreme Court's Chief Justice Roberts granted the Trump administration's request to stay discovery and trial, siding with the Department of Justice's claims that this case causes financial harm, I'm serious, and that it represents a judicial usurpation of power, which I guess then means that any trial dealing with constitutional rights in the face of opposing policy represents a judicial usurpation of power, which then also suggests that courts have no right to uphold constitutional rights unless they perfectly align with existing law. As pointed out by Chief Legal Counsel Julia Olson in a press release, this means that such cases as Brown versus Board of Education would be null and void, since at the time, school segregation was the law of the land. And the same idea goes for gay marriage. In other words, this stay has nothing to do with the historical or actual role of the courts, and it sure as shit has nothing to do with financial harm. Rather, it has everything to do with avoiding the so-called trial of a century that would further throw into sharp focus the fact that our policies are literally killing our children's future. It's about protecting oil and gas profits from the youth's proposed National Climate Recovery Plan, which they say would effectively end the reign of fossil fuels and lead to swift decarbonization. Following this decision on Friday the 19th, Chief Justice Roberts ordered the plaintiffs, the youth, to respond to the government's claims no later than Wednesday, October 24th. So, if you're watching this, they may already have crafted and delivered that response. There may also already be news with regards to trial proceedings. So to get more information on the trial and updates, visit youthgov.org. Finally today, you may have recently heard about the legal fight in North Dakota over indigenous voter suppression. On Tuesday, October 9th, the U.S. Supreme Court denied the Native American Rights Fund's emergency application to stop the state of North Dakota from implementing their hugely discriminatory voter ID law. Kavanaugh abstained, and only Ginsburg and Kagan voted to overturn the Eighth Circuit's decision, allowing the change in voter ID law to stand. The change, signed by North Dakota governor in April of last year, requires voters to have a physical residential address on their ID rather than a P.O. box, something previously allowed and frequently used in rural North Dakota. Of course, proponents of the bill were quick to say that this has everything to do with voter fraud and nothing to do with further oppressing or marginalizing indigenous peoples. But since voter fraud isn't actually a thing, but Jim Crow-style voter suppression is, I'm gonna have to call bullshit on that. Particularly when you look at the timing. A previous injunction which stayed this restrictive voter ID law was in effect during the primaries a mere few months ago. So as noted by the Native American Rights Fund, now voters in North Dakota may find when they go to the polls in November that the voter ID that they used in the primary just a few months earlier is no longer accepted because it does not include their current residential address. In this case, Native American voters will be especially affected because they often lack residential street addresses, because their homes do not have addresses on them by no fault of their own. Indeed, in accordance with laws and treaties, many tribal members have P.O. boxes rather than residential addresses on their IDs, in part because the post office does not provide delivery to the remote areas where people live. And while neither party can claim civil rights as their guiding light, this decision also cuts along party lines. Just as Black and Hispanic voters purged from voter rolls often vote blue, many Indigenous voters have done the same, making it all the more clear that this move has everything to do with disenfranchising voters and upholding a corrupt electoral system, and, again, nothing to do with empowering people to partake in a democratic electoral system. For more on this issue and solutions in the works, we sat down with Alison Renville, Native activist and lead organizer with Dakotas for America. Take a look.
My name is Alison Renville. I'm affiliated with the tribe of the Sisseton-Wapton-Oyate, which is on the Lake Traverse Reservation in Northeast South Dakota. I am also affiliated with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, as both of my parents are, from two different nations, two different tribes within a nation. Born and raised here on the Lake Traverse Reservation, and here we kind of have parts that are dipped into Minnesota, but the northern part of our reservation actually touches into North Dakota, where the number of tribal members that live in North Dakota is actually kind of unforeseen right now, so we can't really make like a total prediction on how many people this affects. So right now, what a lot of the tribes are working on is to issue kind of like an emergency initiative of needing to like update your voting information, but also like your physical address. So they're working with different 911 coordinators within different counties, and there are a lot of different programs that are not programs or organizations that are kind of reaching out within the two states to help as much as we possibly can.
Talk a little bit about the situation on the reservation that you don't necessarily have like that physical address.
Okay, so under a lot of treaty agreements, we are capable of developing our own land. So usually a tribal member will have 2.5 acres, 2 to 2.5 acres that they can develop for through their housing programs and build their own houses and live their own lives and own that land. So now flash forward, you have people who have never actually used anything but a PO box because they live 30, 40 miles out in the country, and the post office isn't exactly able to fulfill that promise of delivering the mail every single day. So in order to make it easier for rural people, they've opened up the opportunity to do free PO boxes, and some people do pay for them, but a lot of the times they're free. And in that, over the last like 10 years, with the advance in technology, there have been a lot of registered 9/11 addresses, but a lot of people just weren't able to even be contacted about that because they're living way the heck out in the middle of nowhere. And so for this, we're we're focusing on the effects that it has on the native vote, but we also have to acknowledge that a lot of the tribes here have had non-native people occupy the same lands for like maybe 25, 30 years less, and we've all been here 150 years. So that means that there are people who are non-native white settlers whose families have been here for 100 years as well, and those people are being affected as well. And then there's also a huge like immigrant population that you come here and you think that you're going to participate as your first time being an American, and turns out because you live with your aunt and uncle who wanted you to come here and be a better person, you're not going to be able to vote because you don't have a electric bill, or whatever it is in your name. So that's going to affect a lot of young people and a lot of people who have migrated here.
The other thing here is that the tribe lands don't adhere to the same very straight lines that these state borders prescribe to. So there are some people, as I understand it, that are affected in your tribe that live in North Dakota, and then some that live in South Dakota. Talk a little bit about how those different borders play into this.
Okay, so technically our state itself touches, and Standing Rock has the same issue, that half of their reservation is in North Dakota and half of it is in South Dakota. Like Standing Rock, parts of our reservation here in Lake Traverse and it touches into North Dakota and into South Dakota. So both of these issues of disenfranchisement when it comes to like redistricting or the voting crisis in North Dakota affect our tribes the same, because you can get a tribe ID that has the administration building's address on it, but fortunately for like say and it's shifted because in Sisseton, you have the tribal administration building is on the South Dakota side, and in Standing Rock the tribal administration is on the North Dakota side. So like, although that is a solution for some people, it's not a solution for all of them. So for us, I think they're for our tribe itself, and I was hoping to get you a copy to be able to show you, but we're putting personal addresses, and because of the BIA, which is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, because of their involvement, we could actually advocate to issue 9/11 addresses on our own because of being a sovereign nation and being able to establish our own rules and laws and, regulations and stuff. We can kind of work around what it is that they think that they're, that they're going to barricade us with. And
And what are 9/11 addresses?
The addresses that, like, your emergency routes are, the nearest closest to it, because right now we have rural routes. Like before, mine was a rural route 2 box whatever, which just eventually got changed to 457 whatever it is BIA road. So it's been probably only about 15 years that, like, a lot of people, majority of the people, have had a 9/11 address, and a lot of it has to do with Google Maps and, the technology based things that have, like, tracking systems and GPS systems and things like that. So it's the advancement of the technological, but at the same time, I mean, it's also, there are people who made that, conscious decision to not have a 4 or a, I was going to say 45715 is my thing, because I just want to, like, spit that out all the time. But they choose not to do a 9/11 address because they don't want to be on that map.
And it's interesting too. I don't know if this is something that affects you as well, but I know that, for example, some homeless people have access to PO boxes, but of course they don't have a physical address. Is that something that you also deal with?
Yeah, and I think, there's a huge difference in definition of when it comes to homelessness, not just in America, but in Indian country. We have a saying, Madakya Pewasi, which means that we're all related. So when it comes to being quote unquote homeless, you technically, you have a home. It's just, you just happen to be where you are at that moment. And I think because we all are relatives and we all are, capable of taking care of each other, this quote unquote definition of American homelessness isn't always applicable to Native Americans. And I don't think that that concept in itself, because of capitalism or however you want to, say it, doesn't necessarily translate for, a non-native to even recognize that issue for us. It's not necessarily, transferable, like I mentioned. So it's a lot of different conversations going on that are being taken out of the American style context and applied to, like, how does this affect us as Native Americans? How does this affect us as Dakota and Lakota people? Because, these conversations are what we need to have to be able to know who we are and how are we going to collectively move forward in a positive way. So I think, this was meant to negatively impact us as a nation, but it's actually creating kind of like an olive branch for all of us to relate to each other. And fortunately, all 5 tribes in North Dakota are working together right now. And just like in Standing Rock, I mean, this is historic for us because, we've been separated and pushed against each other for so long that there's been so much infighting that we don't have the opportunity to work together as a people rather than as separate nations. So this is actually galvanizing a lot of people in North Dakota, and it's really exciting.
The other thing is that, local politics are so important, and you run for office and are obviously very involved in that. And the importance of local politics for something like this or other issues, particularly environmental issues, is huge.
We have been empowered by not just the environmental movement, but by the fact that there are so many Native Americans running for major offices across the country. So I think, there's a fire that's really going, to quote our one of our candidates for the Democratic nominee in South Dakota, Tatewi Means. She ran for Attorney General, and she is just an amazing woman. And she said that, we're not here to pass on a dimly lit torch. We're here to build bonfires. And that to me made so much sense because that's kind of what it is. There's so many different state parties that have been organizing the same way for 25, 30, 40 years. And here we are, grassroots organizers who have learned, things from not just the American Indian movement, but from the Obama for America grassroots team. And then again in 2016 with Bernie Sanders. We know the effects of getting out in your community and door knocking and talking to people. And it's been really enlightening to be able to kind of take control of how this is going to play out and having our own narrative and telling our own story.
So finally, and with that sort of grassroots mentality, what are some solutions that that you're looking at right now in terms of how to, sidestep this? You mentioned a little bit earlier, but talk about if there are any list of solutions as to how to sidestep this before the election.
Well, right now, luckily for a lot of North Dakota, you have same day registration. And so, as long as you have your tribal ID and an updated address, you can go into the polls and vote the same day that you register. They are creating kind of like funding opportunities right now to issue free IDs for all tribal members in different reservations. So the Turtle Mountain Chippewa Nation or Chippewa tribe up in northern North Dakota actually said that they had issued so many IDs that their machines started melting some. So you have situations like that too. So it's going to be really exciting to see how it plays out. But luckily for us, we have people who know each other, and they trust each other. And that in itself is going to create that foundation for people to mobilize.
And with the, just to clarify, with the tribal ID, are those IDs printed with a 9/11 address, so there's not a PO box?
Yes, most of them are. Like I mentioned, mine is 45715 BIA whatever, and that itself is printed on the card. Or even if you live in North Dakota, like Standing Rock could put their address or their administration building and that be a physical address to locate somebody, because we're all capable of having a home base in those administration buildings. So if I was to lose my ID and they mailed it back to the administration building, I would still manage to get that ID back because someone who knew me or whatever could find it. And that's actually the case for a lot of different tribes because we're all so close-knit and we are all related.
For more on Alison's work, visit dakotasforamerica.org. Also, heads up, California, I have appearances and performances coming up at the College of Marin, as well as in Santa Cruz and Los Angeles. For more information, visit my site at artkillingapathy.com. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people that you don't know. Again, check out the last slide and the show description to find sites that I've talked about and mentioned in this week's show. And for interim updates, do make sure that you sign up for our newsletter at the address below. To those who have donated, thank you so much. Please keep spreading the word in order to ensure our ability to keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch. We got nowhere else to go.